If there ever should be another moment like the one on that highway, I wouldn't want to ask myself the question or say, I didn't say goodbye, or do this, or do that. But I want to be able to say I consciously experienced the day as if it were my last. And that's fun. Yes, that's good.
Miss Berg, you're a life and end-of-life companion. You've studied Buddhist teachings of wisdom, and in 2016 you yourself had a, as you put it, encounter with my consciousness. I would like to talk about your work and your experiences, but first start with your own near-death experience. It happened on the highway during a completely normal overtaking maneuver, if I have researched this correctly.
Yes, that's right.
What exactly happened back then?
I was in a good mood in the morning and thought, I'm going to drive to Konstanz, and I would like to have a nice day there. I got into my car and drove off. During the entire drive, the whole way through, I was listening to the song Ghost. That was a very new song at the time, and I sang along loudly, and I liked it very much. And then I got on the highway toward Konstanz. And there was a truck in front of me. And then I had the feeling, because it wasn't moving forward, I should overtake it. So I moved to the left lane and continued on the highway. And that I still remember very well. Then I kept driving, and suddenly I had the feeling that something was wrong on my right side, because there was not just one car on the shoulder, but there were several, always parked at a distance from each other, and the people were on their cell phones. And then I thought, okay, but I didn't think much of it. And in front of me was a van, so that I couldn't really see ahead. It was going about 120 kilometers an hour. And then it cut out in front of me and rushed over to the other lane. And I thought, he sure is in a hurry. And in that moment, I see a car coming toward me on my lane. I noticed its white front lights, and not the red tail lights, and I looked at the other side of the highway and thought to myself, on that side, it's right, they're all white, they're driving in opposite direction. But the one in front there, that isn't right. But it took me a while to grasp all that. But I was almost hypnotized by these bright car lights. And then I had the feeling, now everything is standing still. Everything around me is standing still. And in that moment, I hear a voice in the car behind me. Then I thought, okay. And I had the feeling that the voice was circling around me. And I was still very fascinated by these white lights. They kind of attracted me, although I thought that
something was wrong.
Something was wrong, yes. And everything happened quite slowly. In the way that I'm talking about it now, it wasn't fast at all. I looked out the window. And in that moment, I had the feeling, I'm out there and I'm looking at the driver. And that was a great feeling, because I had the feeling I'm watching myself drive. And then I thought, but something is wrong. Something can't be right. And for me in the car, nothing was real anymore. I really only perceived it from the front now, that I looked inside the car. But I noticed I can't do anything for the woman sitting in the car at the steering wheel. The voice that was in there that I heard when sitting at the steering wheel, I heard it again. So it was like it had switched.
What kind of voice was it?
That was the good thing. I only listened to the voice because it was my voice. If it had been a stranger, then I would have been very irritated. But it was a familiar voice, and it was like I was telling myself something. But since she was behind me because of what she said, I thought, well, that's not me, it can't be.
What did she say?
She said, what happens now is in this next moment still in your control. And then she said a sentence which I didn't understand at all. If you want to continue living, you have to accept death. It could also be that I die. And then I sat there and thought, well, great. What should I do now? And then she said, look to the right. And I looked to the right and saw the cars parking on the shoulder again, people on their cell phones. Do you think that's normal? I said, no, I don't think that's normal at all. Earlier, I already thought that it wasn't normal. But because I was now looking to the right, I had the feeling for the first time in this whole experience that I didn't have to look at this driver anymore, at the bright white light. That was gone. And then she said, now I have to decide to either drive over to the right or keep going straight ahead. And I think because I heard my familiar voice saying this, I had this thought that the only thing that makes me want to drive over to the right is that this morning I didn't tell my husband and the children that I love them.
So that was the decision for you, how your life would continue, so to speak.
Yes.
And basically, it was a situation where someone drove straight at you, and you then experienced the time in a sort of stretched out way. And in reality, it all happened just in a moment.
Yes. It couldn't have been that long, because afterwards I was questioned by the police. And there I said, I can just tell you what it was like for me, because it really felt that long. But I know it can't be. But I noticed that I needed that because of my intellect. I needed someone who talked to me about it, because I just didn't understand it. I knew, my mind knew, how it was going to feel in this situation. That's a car coming toward you, and you're about to crash together, frontally. And then I remembered what the crash might sound like. From TV, from everywhere I'd heard it before, this bang. And I had the feeling I was afraid of that sound. I didn't want to hear it. So a lot of things played a role in that moment. But the main thing was that I couldn't tell my husband and the children in the morning how much I loved them. That was such a touching moment that I decided I would like to get the chance to say it again. Well, afterwards I found it quite strange, but that was how it was.
That means after that moment you moved over to the right, and then you were out of danger.
Yes, the crazy thing is, well, it all happened in just a few seconds. But I still had this image in my mind. I knew who I had overtaken, and I knew that he was very slow, and I thought he's going to be next to me again at some point. I can't go over to the right at all. But I also wasn't able to look to the right somehow. And the nice thing was that this figure, or what I thought was my body, as if it had done this for me, it said, I can go to the right now. And then this sentence, if I want to live, it really expressed it that way. If I want to live, I have to take the risk. And then I thought, okay, then I'll take the risk.
How did it go on? You said that you had to deal with the police, so it wasn't that afterwards everyone just drove on.
No, I got out at the next exit. It was a rest area. And I immediately called my husband. And I just screamed over the phone if he actually knew how happy he could be I wasn't dead. And of course he didn't understand anything. And I was full of adrenaline. Something happened to me. I started shaking. I couldn't go on anymore. I really couldn't do anything anymore. I just parked the car somehow. I got out and went to a table. It was nice weather. And then a man approached me, really calmed me down and talked to me. And I couldn't say what had happened. I had the feeling I was searching for something, because I wasn't myself anymore. I wasn't me at all. I looked for this voice. I looked for what was still in the car and what I had seen in front of me. and I couldn't find it anymore. That was the only thing I trusted, where I thought that was real. Everything else, not anymore.
You probably, for the first time in your life, at that particular moment, perceived yourself from the outside, so to speak.
Yes.
You had a different perception than you have in everyday life. Did that surprise you, move you? What did that do to you? Were you immediately able to talk to someone about it?
No, not at all. No. When I saw myself from the outside, that in itself I found very fascinating. To look at myself like that, like into a mirror. But I knew from the outside, or also from behind me, I saw my hair, my head. But that was fine. That was normal. That wasn't scary at all for me or anything like that. It was rather really fascinating that I was facing myself and saw what I was doing.
But not just like a mirror image, but a spatial perception.
Absolutely, absolutely.
From all sides, all around.
Yes, really from all sides, all around. I could walk. I didn't fly up or come down from above. It was like scanning and looking what was happening around the car. Because I didn't look if I could go over to the right afterwards. I didn't care at all.
And what did the experience after this shock do to you in the long run? Did it change you?
Yes. The exciting thing, I think, was that the only one who believed what had happened to me was the police, who came to the parking lot and questioned me. That was the first time I was able to calm down, and I found it fascinating how he talked to me to find out what I experienced there. But I knew I was still in shock and just said, I find it exciting that I'm experiencing something that I usually hear from my clients who come to me. And now I'm suddenly one of those who experienced something. And it was very analytically the way I dealt with it. I really talked to myself. It was fascinating, exciting. When my husband picked me up and I went home, I was no longer... I didn't have the feeling in those moments that I was completely there or clear. I had the feeling that a part of me was no longer there. I wasn't complete. Like, through this shock, I was missing something.
You just mentioned that your clients tell you about such things. You are a life and end-of-life companion. Did this experience have an impact on your work? Did you see your work, your clients, the experiences of your clients differently than before?
Yes, I saw them very differently. Because before this experience, well, I'm cold when people lie dying. And then I accompany them until they pass away, or beyond that, and work with the relatives. But these are always scheduled passings. I'm cold, and then you know that the person is dying. And I thought to myself, okay, you do this work with accuracy and with joy, and all that, and always specifically for the dying person at the right moment, when they are dying, because that's when I'm cold. And suddenly I had the feeling that I hadn't understood anything at all. Because this was an encounter where I had the feeling that it was an unexpected death. What about that? That was when I felt I can't say goodbye. Death can happen at any point, and that's it. That changed everything completely for me.
Has your outlook or your attitude regarding what actually happens when you die and what happens after death changed? Are you now more convinced of a life after death than you used to be?
More convinced, definitely. Because someone helped me, and afterwards, over the years, well, I've realized that I've always had to look for new teachers or help to understand what had happened. For me, this turning point that death can happen at any moment changed a lot, namely to be able to live my life more intensely, or to be able to live it all.
You're now aware that it can really happen at any time.
Very quickly, very suddenly, yes. Logically, I knew it could happen. But today I know that it had to be hammered into me so that I could really understand that it can happen at any point. You can be torn away from life at any moment. And at some point, you no longer have the chance that someone tells you, come on, do this, or maybe ask for something. You could decide to continue your life. That's not always the case, I felt. No, at some point, it's just over.
During the time of dying, there are some phenomena of which relatives, but also caregivers or death companions sometimes report. These include, for example, deathbed visions, meaning the dying give the impression that already shortly before they die, they are already in contact with the world beyond. Did you have any experiences with a deceased that you accompanied shortly before they died, which seemed to you to be unusual phenomena?
Well, it often happens that a deceased knows shortly before he dies that there are other people in the room. They are just already there. And that's something that I always believed to be the case. But later on, it fascinated me much more. I wanted to know what they looked like, who is there. And I also noticed that these questions did them good, that they noticed.
So you spoke to them about it?
Yes, I spoke to them about it. And then they also felt taken seriously in any case. And they also described it, those who still could. And that was a huge enrichment for me. It was very valuable for me that people see that. Or also, I was sent to a case where the mother was already in a coma, so she didn't wake up at all. The sisters were also already there. The daughter called me and asked if I could still come. I came and went down the stairs into this room where the dying person was. The sisters walked out, and I went in, and the lady opened her eyes and held my hand, but she was in a way no longer responsive, hadn't opened her eyes before that, and the daughter was very touched. And I asked if I could sit with her, and I was allowed to go there and sat down with her. The woman told me that she was about to die, and she was happy that I was there, but with such a clarity, as if she was waiting for me. But she absolutely couldn't have known. I was called by the daughter, and she was also not responsive at the time. And that touched me so much that I thought, yes, there's something there. There's something we may not be able to explain.
Was there a special impulse that prompted you to become an end-of-life companion? Was that a dream job, or did it just happen?
No. Maybe it was an internal wish. But what really prompted it was when I underwent a surgery where the anesthesia didn't fully take effect. Well, surgery, it was my first C-section. And those who operated on me didn't believe me when I said I wasn't fully anesthetized. And then they cut my belly open, and I felt that. And I said, I can feel them cutting. And then, of course, there was huge excitement, and I was immediately given general anesthesia and went completely under. And somehow I had the feeling that this sudden general anesthesia did something to me. I could see, not like the wrong-way driver, but I could see how my daughter was born, how they took her out of my belly. And I was so outraged at how they did that. I later wrote to newspapers and talked to the hospital and said, you should never be allowed to do that again, to pull children out of the belly like that.
Although you were fully put under, you could witness that. Internally, or in what way?
No, I stood next to myself and held my own hand. I'm there for you. But I think I hid that up until the experience with the wrong-way driver. I also had to work through the shock of having felt them cut my belly open. I think I was much more concerned with that.
But that was actually already a first out-of-body experience.
But I didn't see it that way at all. I was just outraged at how they could pull a child out of a belly like that, but it bore fruit later.
Did you talk to the doctors about it afterwards?
Yeah.
How did they react?
They insisted that they always do it that way. And then I wrote a column in the newspaper that I was curious to know how other mothers experienced this. I couldn't ask the children because they came into the world, but I know that my doctor here in Switzerland, who was later very, very grateful and himself brought children into the world, he said that he really would take this to heart, because I had the feeling that my daughter should have been woken up, just given a little push or something.
Too mechanical, the whole procedure.
Yes, she was sleeping, and they just pulled her out of my belly. And I noticed afterwards that it had an impact, but I never connected it to my experience on the highway.
Wasn't it surprising for the doctors to hear that you had witnessed something during a general anesthetic that you should not have been able to perceive? Did no one ask you about that?
One of them said to me, "It's not like what you see on TV." And that was the end of it for him.
So he, in a way, confirmed it.
Yes. Then I thought, yeah, okay, I just said it, but I couldn't really let it go. My firstborn that I had via C-section, that was really the moment when I thought, I never want to have another child again because of this danger of dying. For both of us, it was already going downhill before. And I had to work through that for a few years and realize I had passed this feeling onto my daughter. She always said to me, "Mom, I thought something was wrong with me, that you didn't want me." And then I first had to learn that it wasn't about that. It was about the fact that we could have died during it. For me, it was just that I felt like everything was part of this path. Because you asked me how I came to end-of-life care. I have experienced different kinds of death, paving the way in front of me, leading me to eventually end up here.
Many people shy away from accompanying relatives or others at the deathbed because, to some extent, we still consider death a taboo in our society. On the other hand, there are many reports of deeply moving moments that occur during such companionship. You've also shared a little about this. Do you think that, as a society, we are missing out on something by making death such a taboo and by leaving people to face it more on their own?
Yes, 100%. After my experience with the wrong-way driver, I started painting urns and coffins because I thought, I can't just meet people and say, who wants to talk about their death? That's rather difficult. But when I said that I want to paint on my last home, people really started to contact me and said, "And then what?" And I said, "We'll do it at a table, we'll drink something, and we'll eat something, and we'll talk about death, and that at some point we won't be here anymore." And that works. That's how it works. And you also notice that people are fascinated and that they deal differently with their own death, but also relatives deal differently. They are somehow shocked. Why do we have to talk about death? Why do you have to paint the urn yourself? I'll go somewhere and buy it. And I say, yes, but there are also the others who say they need the contact, the possibility to talk about it. And so I was able to pass it on to others in a playful way, because I really like painting. We can try this approach to be able to talk about it, but also do something at the same time. Not just as some kind of evening where you say, let's talk a little bit about death, or the relatives who called me when a dying person was lying there, and I was allowed to connect a little bit with them. I didn't know where the information came from, but I said, and there were probably 7 people, relatives with children, who accompanied their father. And then I said suddenly, I smell tobacco. I don't know why, but I smell tobacco. And I have the feeling that your father would like to be able to smell it again. And I can only tell you, They knew right away that he had smoked a pipe. His wife knew right away what kind of tobacco it had to be. They were puzzled at first that I suggested he should be allowed to smell tobacco one last time. But then it wasn't a big thing. They got it. Everyone was somehow feeling even closer to the father. And they just held the tobacco under his nose. And everyone could sit there with a completely different feeling, and then he died afterwards. But that was an experience that just came to me, how relatives felt being there, and also really being part of the process. That this experience is not always just very, very sad, but there can also be really good moments.
Really moving moments.
Yes.
How are you doing after all your experiences today? When you think about death, are you still afraid? Do questions remain?
I have now found out over the years for myself, every morning when I wake up, I tell myself, and today you could die. My children find that they said, Mom, there are nicer sentences you could say to yourself in the morning than today you could die. And I said, no, it's not about dying, it's about life. If I make myself aware that today could be my last day, or today I could die, then the second step is, and what do we do with the beautiful day today?
It's actually about being close to life.
Yes, and not at all about dying, but about if there ever should be another moment like the one on that highway, I wouldn't want to ask myself the question or say I didn't say goodbye or do this or do that. But I want to be able to say I consciously experienced the day as if it were my last. And that's fun. That's good. For me, that's a good thing.
Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you too.